On July 30, 2026, at 1:31 in the morning UTC, about 500 Bitcoin wallets got drained in 25 minutes. 500 wallets gone. 594 Bitcoin, roughly $38 million. And the victims did everything right: hardware wallets, seed phrases written down, no suspicious links. But they all had one thing in common: a cold card. By the end, you'll know how this attack worked, why it went unnoticed for years, and whether your own seed is safe. Between 1:31 and 1:56 Universal Time Coordinated on July 30, 2026, a 25-minute window spanning Bitcoin blocks 960,188 to 960,191, roughly 594 Bitcoin was swept out of about 500 single signature addresses. Rob Hamilton, co-founder of AnchorWatch, published the first breakdown: 1,324 spent outputs across about 500 transactions, with 562 Bitcoin consolidated into a single address that hasn't moved since. The details scream automation. Wallets clustered in a narrow band, 0.15 to 0.26 Bitcoin each, an operator setting a value floor. The coin spanned 2021 to 2026, the lifetime of the flaw. Kevin Loack at Wizard Sardine noticed the sweep hit BIP84 SegWit paths. Jameson Lopp found some wallets only partially drained, a tool enumerating a limited path space. A partially drained wallet is not safe, the rest can vanish in a later pass. And the total may be bigger. Blocks Clay Garrett flagged 695 earlier transactions with the same fingerprint, another 488 Bitcoin, pushing the total toward 1,082, roughly $70 million. Unconfirmed, but the fit is strong. So how does a hardware wallet, the gold standard of Bitcoin security, let this happen? It all comes down to one word: entropy. Every Bitcoin wallet is built from a secret random number, a seed phrase. 12 words encode 128 bits of entropy, 24 encode 256. Every key derived from that seed rests on that number being genuinely unpredictable. 128 bits is unsearchable. There isn't enough energy in the observable universe to enumerate 2 to the 128th possibilities. But if that generator can only ever emit 2 to the 40 distinct outputs, your seed is one of about 1 trillion possibilities. An attacker who understands the generator produces every candidate offline, derives each address, and checks the blockchain. When a match is found, the funds are theirs. The wallet's cryptography was never broken. The randomness feeding it was. That's the same mechanism behind Randstorm, Milksad, and the Trust Wallet LCG bug. Computers are deterministic machines, they don't naturally produce randomness. Real hardware wallets use a dedicated chip that measures physical noise, tiny variations in temperature, voltage, jitter in the circuits. That's a true random number generator. But somewhere between that chip and your seed phrase, one mistake switched the plumbing. Let's find that mistake. In March 2021, Coinkite moved Coldcard's cryptography onto libsec 256K1, the same library Bitcoin Core uses. But wallet seed generation started requesting randomness through that library, and instead of the hardware RNG, a single integration error, it reached a software substitute. Simplified, the board config disables MicroPython's hardware RNG because Coldcard has its own. But the crypto library checked whether that macro was defined, not whether it was enabled. So MicroPython compiled in its software fallback, a deterministic generator called Yasmeringue, seeded from the chip's unique ID, a system timer, and a real-time clock register. None of those are cryptographic entropy. Once you know those values and the call count, the entire stream is deterministic. The damage differs by device. On MK2 and MK3 running firmware 4.0.0 through 4.1.9, no cryptographic entropy was added at all. Wallet generation is fully deterministic. On MK4, Q, and MK5, boot adds secure element entropy, but keeps only 4 bytes, so the search space collapses to at most 2 to the 32. 4 billion candidates. For a script, a weekend on a GPU. Critical detail: exposure depends on the firmware used when your seed was generated, not purchase date. Upgrading does not repair an existing seed. And if you exported a vulnerable seed to another wallet, it's still affected. If you created your seed with your own randomness, physical dice, words out of a hat, you're not affected. The attack targets device-generated seeds. A BIP39 passphrase also protects you if it's strong. A short one like dog adds almost nothing, an attacker cycles a dictionary. 6 BIP39 words of passphrase makes the attack implausible. For dice, Coinkite recommends at least 50 rolls, ideally 99. MK1 and early MK2/MK3 firmware through 3.2.2 used the hardware RNG directly outside this regression. The vulnerable path is MK2 and MK3 on firmware 4.0.0 through 4.1.9. Weak randomness entered production in March 2021. MK4, Q, and MK5 shipped with the fallback in weak 32-bit reseed. Effective entropy on the MK3 collapsed to roughly 40 bits. Newer devices reach only about 72 by the maker's own estimate. If your seed was generated on a vulnerable device and you didn't add your own entropy, treat it as at risk. Right now. Not next week. The response was fast and public. At 5:35 p.m. Universal Time Coordinated, Kevin Loeck asked Coldcard holders to check their balances, not a false alarm. Around 6:10 p.m., Coinkite CEO Rodolfo Novak responded, initially attributing the reports to a single compromised seed rather than a device-wide flaw. That assessment changed within hours. Later that day, Coinkite published its MK3 security advisory, scoping risk to firmware 4.0.1 through 5.0.3. Then Block's Bitcoin engineering team, with anonymous security researchers, independently root-caused the bug, that RNG integration error. They disclosed privately to Coinkite, then published their analysis, expanding scope to the MK4, Q, and MK5. The lesson, victims reported loudly, and researchers moved in hours, not weeks. But there may be more affected wallets the sweep hasn't touched. Your action plan. 1. Figure out which firmware generated your seed. If you're on the vulnerable list, generate a brand new seed on updated firmware, ideally a MK4 or Q, or add strong entropy with dice. Move your funds immediately. Do not keep spending from a partially drained wallet. Do not reuse the old seed. 2. Consider Multisig. A 2 of 3 setup across different vendors means no single device flaw can take your coins. If one key path was weak, the other 2 keys still protect you. 3. Remember the root cause, the cryptography was never broken, the randomness was. Anytime you hear hardware wallet, the real question isn't what chip it uses, it's where the entropy comes from. If this video saved you from losing Bitcoin or even made you double-check your setup, that's exactly why I make these. Subscribe for weekly deep dives into the stories that matter for your money. And comment, passphrase or dice rolls with your hardware wallet? I read every single one.